Okay, it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce our panelists today. We have Jess, Ben, and Bailey here, and I will toss it over to them to introduce themselves and sort of where they're coming from and what they're up to. So over to you, my friends.
You go first, Bailey.
All right. I'll kick us off. So hi, my name is Bailey Eastwood. My pronouns are they, them. I'm coming from Tiohtià, also known as Montreal. Um, and I'm a ordained minister in the United Church, and I'm the national coordinator of the Student Christian Movement of Canada, which is also part of the World Student Christian Federation. So I work with students across the country that are looking to build community, usually at their universities, around a faith that is grounded in sort of the revolutionary teachings of Jesus and the understanding that Jesus was the champion of the marginalized and um, was very concerned about the lived realities of people. So I get to work with rad students who want to express their faith through social justice, and also often who are looking for Christian communities that are affirming, which don't exist everywhere, and especially on a lot of campuses. So that's me in a nutshell. I will toss it over to Jess.
I'm Jess Andrews, and it's good to be here with all of you. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joining from Mohkinstsis or Calgary today. Some of the communities that I'm a part of here are I'm part of Treaty 7. I work as campus minister with United Church at the University of Calgary, so I'm a part of a wonderful community at the Faith and Spirituality Center there. I also work as a Canadian certified counselor and registered psychotherapist qualifying, and am trying to specialize in the area of spiritual trauma. And yeah, that's what I'm up to out west.
My name's Ben. My pronouns are they, them, and I am out wester in Vancouver, in the unceded and stolen territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh and nations. And I'm a music minister for the United Church. I also the pianist in residency at the Anglican Cathedral here, and I have been on a long process of working my way from being an ally in the 1990s through to realizing, oh, there's something going on here. There's a reason I was drawn to queer community, and but throughout that has been also this process of activism and building community, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Mhm. Thank you. Ben,
The
you're sorry, go ahead, Bailey.
I was just going to say the hardcore ally to, oh,
Yeah.
wait, pipeline is real.
I was just going to say I was vice president of my Rainbow Club in high school, just as an ally because I wanted
Yeah.
people to have space.
Yep.
So thank you so much for sharing your Spark Notes versions of yourselves. As we go through, I really now want to start asking you about the work that you're doing and maybe how long you've been taking part in advocacy in your various communities. But also, I would like each of you to share a meaningful story from your advocacy work that can highlight some of what you think is really important about the work that we do.
You might have to choose a victim here, otherwise we're just going to sit here politely doing the Canadian thing of waiting for some to be called on.
Nice church people.
Yeah.
Well, Bailey went first last time, so we'll give it to Jess this time.
Okay. So it was a good to get these questions ahead of time and just reflect a little bit, like how did I get involved? So there were two key things for me. I went to school at Toronto School of Theology, and one of my colleagues there really sort of opened my eyes to the presence of spiritual trauma in everyday places in the church and not just related to clergy sexual abuse, and a lot related to direct spiritual harm, quiet, subtle marginalization, and disclusion of queer people especially. And that just really, that was an eye-opener for me. When the citywide Pride Interfaith Service, which is a streamed online service, but also an in-person service in Calgary that happens once a year during Pride Week. And it's a collaboration between the YYC Affirming Network of Faith Communities and Affirming Connections. So the first time that I saw that service online, I was quite disillusioned with the church at that time. And I just wept and wept. And I thought it was the most beautiful service I'd ever seen. And so a year or two later, I found myself volunteering on the production team for it. And I did that for 2 years, which was really fulfilling. And it was a great way to get connected with people in Calgary as well.
Mm.
Ben, why don't you go?
Sure. So, like I said before, kind of started off as an ally and then kind of had my various self-realization and radicalization moments. And have been doing quite a bit recently, but the piece I want to pull up, just because I like the story, I was in the film industry working on a commercial in Texas, and it was going horribly. And I got called by a friend who worked at an erotic theater in Seattle saying, my show's opening, we lost our clown. Can you fly back early and be a clown in my show at the erotic theater for a weekend? I promise this is relevant.
Incredible.
So, flew back to Seattle, had about 3 hours to prepare. Thought I was signing up for a weekend. This was they were kind of trying to merge erotic theater with high-end art. It was a whole thing. Show was popular, got held over for 6 months, and so I was developing this character of a clown. Uh, every weekend around a whole lot of queer naked people. And as Jules knows, there's nothing like clowning to help kind of bring out the and test the pieces of yourself that might not be safe in the real world. So that became a real kind of testing ground among queer community to to start to figure out who I was. But also a real launchpad for queer activism. We had Pride coming up in Seattle and knew that the standard assortment of people inspired by Westboro Baptist would be demonstrating in the middle of Pride. And so with a group from the theater said, well, let's be the clowns against fun because everyone knows that God hates fun. Because they would have similar signs about other things that God hates. So we went out as the very, very sad clowns with Jesus wept and so do we and we just demonstrated right next to these people, and it was such a profound experience because their goal was to create anger and create confrontation. They want people yelling and screaming. And people would see them and start to get angry, and they would see us and they would start laughing. And it changed the vibe so much that that group packed up and left early. And that for me was kind of the moment of we can work so much with with using our identities in these kind of enhanced ways to reframe the entire argument. So hugely formative for me in many ways.
Wow. I love that. Clowns against fun. I think that's a really, really great experience, Ben. Yeah, wow, thank you.
That is so cool. That's rad. I suppose it's my turn. So my like roots in ministry and in the church really is youth and young adult ministries. So I grew up in a United Church, then I got involved in United Church summer camping, and then through that I got involved in a very weird and great little organization in Ontario called Ontario Youth Parliament. And I had the privilege of like figuring out that I was queer in weird queer church youth groups, which is, A plus, super, super lucky. So that is sort of like my introduction to queerness was like really tied with church community. And I think that has definitely like sparked my passion for making sure those spaces are more available to the people who need them. And then through some years later, I discerned a call to ministry. And then it's while I was in seminary, it was like between my first and second years of seminary that I sort of figured out that I was non-binary, and came into that realization. And because of that experience, I think it really kind of shifted my understanding of what my call was, and really like underscored to me that a big part of my call to ministry was to be like a visible presence of the existence of queer folks in the church, and the fact that those things are not opposed to each other. SCM, this predates me, but SCM had a really cool campaign a few years ago called Queer and Christian Without Contradiction, and like proclaiming that became a really important part of my call. And then I think I was also reflecting, Jess, on this question of like, what's an important story from your activism? And I'm like, because I feel like I am someone who is not necessarily gifted in like being a clown against fun. I am not always a big gestures kind of person. And so I was thinking I have a few different stories, but one is actually, it's funny because it's sort of like, it's not my story, but it's also my story. Which is, so my spouse is non-religious. And my context is Quebec, which is like very culturally Catholic. And that like really predominates how people understand Christianity here. And when my now spouse and I first got together, their friends were like, "You're dating a minister?" Because they grew up in the Catholic Church and then were like, "Nah," and became very like anti-organized religion, like organized religion is bad and doing bad things in the world. And then somehow we got together. And so like obviously like they learned nuances around what Christianity can be through me. And one of the things that came from that is they're a teacher. They teach English literature to 18 to 20-year-olds. And they have a lot of freedom in what they teach. And so through exposure to me and like our conversations about things, they've started teaching some poems by a trans Christian poet that talk about the really kind of like explore like religion and queerness and that alternate perspective of people who are like finding ways to merge those identities. And they've like shown me reflections that their students write, being like, wow, I didn't know people were doing this, and like this is opening up space for me. And so I like that story, and I tell that story sometimes because I think like it reminds me that just being visible in our duality of identities like has these ripple effects in the world that I think need to not be underestimated.
Thank you. All three of you, thank you for sharing.
I'm going to jump back in, Julian.
Yeah.
And then the queer and Christian without contradiction, I like that. And because I didn't really share a meaningful story, so I'm going to jump back in with that. But yeah, I'd just like to talk a little bit about there's so many meaningful stories, like the like big mic drop moment of the clowns on the with West, at the protest. I don't have like a big mic drop moment, but I have so many small stories. At Campus United, which is across the Pacific Mountain region of the United Church in BC. and the Chinookwids region, which is southern Alberta. All of the campus ministers and the hired students that work with the campus ministers and with the United Church on campuses across those areas, all of us together, we're called Campus United. And we do preferentially hire people from groups that are being pushed to the margins, racialized students, students with diverse gender and sexual identities, for example, lots of neurodiverse students. And so that's one thing we do. And really, the student role is meant, the community connector role is meant to help us run our events and programs, but it's also very much considered a leadership development role. And we really want to be pouring in radical acceptance, belonging, just sort of growth and leadership skills into this group of students. And so they will choose and run their own programs throughout the year. So some of the programs that we've run this year, from the amazing ideas that our student employees have come up with, have been a gender affirming clothing swap, which was really cool. Students that, like one of the students said at the clothing swap, well, I've been wanting to try on my mom and my sister's dresses, but they wouldn't fit me and I didn't feel comfortable going shopping. And here I was able to come here and I have this armful of clothes and big twinkling eyes and huge smile on their face. And so that was a really neat thing to be a part of. We have a banned book party coming up actually this week, So really focusing on the themes of why books are being banned, a lot of transphobia, homophobia, racism, misogyny, things like that. And we have a queerness and faith lunch chat that meets every 2 weeks. One of the things that's really surprised me about that is I was expecting to get a lot of Christians, like post-evangelicals, or more progressive, affirming Christians coming out, which we do have coming out, but we have a lot of different students from different faith backgrounds, Muslim, Hindu, coming out to that event as well. And it's a very small, intimate group and very informal. We just talk about what the students want to talk about, but occasionally we'll have a special topic. So we had a student that asked to share about some of the stories that they've been researching within Hinduism that supported an affirming perspective and shared that with the group. And it's been a really neat thing to be a part of, and also heartbreaking because the students, a common story that I hear from students is, I'm out in these spaces, but not in these spaces. And my family knows, and they're even doing pretty well at being supportive, but my faith community beyond my family would not be supportive. And so I can't come out there, not because I wouldn't be willing to come out there, but because my family would be shunned. And I won't do that to my parents. And that's, that's just really real. So to have a place where students can talk to each other and go, oh, that's something you're experiencing too, just to have a little bit less aloneness in that struggle is it's really meaningful. And I'm really pleased that because identifying as an ally, I wouldn't be able to run this group without the help of my community connectors that identify as queer. It just wouldn't work. So I'm really grateful to the students that are working with Campus United and the good work that they're doing on campus.
Thank you. Being at Emmanuel College here in Toronto, it's an interfaith college, and kind of what you're saying happens in your group is something that is very familiar to me as well, happening at school. And I think it's an important piece of the work that we do, not only in our own faith communities, but with neighbors in our communities surrounding us. It's really important to remember, that we are not alone, that we are not the first nor the last. Really, really important. Yeah, thank you. And it kind of brings up a follow-up question to me, one that I didn't tell you guys ahead of time. But I'm curious if you'll be willing to share a challenging story, something that has maybe challenged you or challenged the work that you're doing, and how you found your way through that, what that looked like for you. And I think, Ben, you're first this round, so whenever you have had a moment to think.
I guess what comes to me immediately, so I played for 8 or 9 years for the St. Bridget's service at Christ Church Cathedral here in Vancouver, which is the afternoon kind of experimental, progressive queer service, which in many ways kind of became was and evolved into a space that was also really explicitly designed for the needs of neurodivergent people and the needs of people who had been terribly wounded by the church. And it's where someone could come and sit quietly for a year and not be bothered until they finally said, "Hey, I this is the first time in since I was a kid that I felt safe enough somewhere to keep coming back." And all of that was very positive in many ways. In most ways, the challenges that we ran into were that service, instead of a sermon, had a period of open reflection, where anyone could speak up and share their thoughts. And as a cathedral in the downtown of a big city, you'd get people coming in off the street all the time saying, "Oh, hey, it's a church. This means I can share my idea of what church is." And so you would often end up with folks coming in who had their own trauma or their own issues, but whose idea of church was, "This is a place where I can shit on gay people publicly." And and so the constant challenge was, how do we create an environment where people can speak and share, but where we can hold what they speak and share within sets of community standards and without necessarily. And so there was a very long process, after some very dramatic moments of figuring out how do we frame this experience, and how do we be explicit about the basic community values for the people who are walking in. And I think it's a case where we could have done better. There were certainly people who experienced things like this and never came back, where someone was speaking up, but there was also kind of the power of working together as a community to discern and create structures to allow both kind of that open sharing, but also to have a framework to be able to step past our kind of polite passive receiving and say, "You know what, in this space we meet each other with love." And this felt like a statement that was not meeting that goal.
Thank you.
I'll jump in because I think ours is sort of around community standards as well. The thought that's coming to mind for me in our queerness and faith lunch chats, we started out by collaborating together to create some brave space guidelines, and then we've needed to add several more guidelines along the way as we sort of learn from experiences that come up. And one of the guidelines that we've added, two of the guidelines that we've added, are to center the queer experience, because sometimes we would have people joining that aren't identifying as queer and aren't even necessarily identifying as allies, but are more identifying as just have questions around faith and queerness. And even though all of our posters and everything indicate that it's, the space is intended for folks identifying as queer and active allies, that's just there as well. And we're glad that people are interested in asking questions, but we're intentionally, that's not what the space is for. So what are we centering? And then the other thing is just how do we how do we be intentional and careful about making the space trauma informed? Because many of the students have really difficult stories and lived experiences, and sometimes they'd like somewhere to share them. And so what we have decided together as a group is that consent goes more than one direction. So just like we wouldn't ask someone to share if they weren't ready and they weren't consenting to share. We also recognize that listening to someone's traumatic story requires consent as well, consent to receive it. So we have sort of a two-way, a both and consent process in our group.
I like that, the two-way consent process. It's really, yeah, and I appreciate the language about brave space as well. Just in case anybody in the room or watching doesn't maybe know what brave space means, would you mind just touching on that?
Well, I think it's an intentional vocabulary choice that's different than safe space, because we can't guarantee a safe space. And so there are, like, if you Google brave space guidelines, there's different things that people, checklists that people have made up and whatnot. But yeah, the choice of the word brave space is around really wanting to build trust in not promising something that we don't know for sure we can guarantee.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think my story goes into like a little bit of a different direction. I'm thinking I have less specific incident. Well, although, yeah. But I think one of the things that is like a constant struggle for me is like trying to get the affirming church to like put the work in where the intention is there. So in addition to SCM, I'm quite involved with the regional council of the United Church in my region. Really wonderful folks. And so I'm always struggling with the fact that the United Church is like in spirit, super queer affirming, super supportive, and like very, when it comes to like gay stuff, they're pretty much, they're great. Like, but the church still has a way to go in terms of being functionally welcoming to trans folks, especially non-binary trans folks. And that's something I constantly struggle with, both in and of myself. Like, and I'm like, like I can put on my thick skin. I go to my church meetings and I know that no one is going to gender me correctly. Like I always say, I'm like, there are maybe like 3 to 5 people in my regional council who I can count on to gender me correctly. I love it. Just then I see the nods and we share the struggle. And it's like the will is there. They all like, and they're all like, I'm sure. So they're like, yeah, we have trans people in our region. It's awesome. But there's just this, I almost think of it often as like complacency built from like, I think because the United Church is like, we've been affirming since 1988. Our communities often forget that being affirming entails constant learning and constant work. I used to be working in this really incredible congregation that had been an affirming congregation for over 10 years. They did a ton of great ministry, but man, there were maybe 2 people in that congregation that gendered me correctly. And I had a private bathroom in my office, but there were no non-gendered bathrooms available to people who walked into that church. And so it was a thing where I'm like, I would hear people be like, oh, I'm like looking for affirming faith spaces. And I would come up with this. It's like, I know so many places that like in spirit, yes. But like, if I try to think of like somewhere that I'd actually feel really comfortable sending a trans person to, knowing that they're mostly not going to get misgendered, that they're going to be able to find a bathroom they can use, like, oh man, does the number plummet. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's a conclusion to this other than it's just, that's like the constant wall that I feel like I come up against, that I'm always trying to push the needle on. And I remember that was one of like the joyful things when I started working for SCM. I was like, everybody I work with genders me correctly now. It's crazy. They'd had previous non-binary staff, and also because it's mostly university students or people who work with them. So I'm in a bubble in my job, but when I step out of that, it's like, oh man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really resonate with a lot of what you're saying there, Bailey. Yeah, Jess, I noticed you turned your microphone on. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and answer Chris Dolson's question. Thank you for the question, if that's okay. So some of the ways that we implement, like how do we practically implement two-way consent? So if we would there'd be like a group vibe check. So if it really, like, the person that's facilitating and holding the container of the space really has to be quite proactive in explaining what this means at the outset of each group when you're reviewing your Brave Space guidelines, because it can be a new idea, and it's like there can be a sense in the group, like if someone's like, oh, I really want to share this thing, say it's around a theme of suicide, there can be this sense from the other people in the group that, like, well, we want to say yes. Even if I really don't feel up to that today, like, I want to say yes because this other person wants to share and I'm human and I want to be there for them. But it has to be normalized that it's okay to say no to as well, right? And in order for that to be normalized, there has to be proactive communication around it, and you kind of have to know there's going to be another way for that person to be supported. So I think what works well in our group is I do one-on-one spiritual care appointments as well. So there's always the option that that person can follow up with me after the group is over or make an appointment with me later, and there we can do, they would have an opportunity to share. So it's not like if the group isn't up for it that day that they wouldn't have an opportunity to share. The other way it kind of comes up is if I'm like throwing out, hey, what are some conversation topics for the day? Like, we have some stuff going on in Alberta in our government and legislative process right now that's diminishing trans rights in Alberta. And so I remember one group, I brought that up, hey, do you guys want to talk about this? And the group was like, nope. Let's talk about something else. And so that's another, like, sometimes the topics that are a shared topic that everyone's going through are just, no, we're hearing enough about that. We don't want to talk about that here too. So does that answer your question, Chris?
Well, I think, Jess, what you were talking about, and Bailey, your piece that you were sharing ties really well into our next sort of stream of question here, is how can communities of faith, and this can be a congregation, this can be a campus ministry, this can be a group that gathers at a coffee shop, right? How can communities of faith contribute to the work of this sort of advocacy and supporting people who have experienced religious trauma or spiritual harm? Yeah, Bailey, one thing that you were talking about explicitly is learning how to use different pronouns. I think is a really, a first step in supporting advocacy and individuals who have experienced harm in that kind of way. But
yeah, I can sort of jump in on the first part of that, and I think other folks here are maybe like more equipped to answer the supporting folks with religious trauma portion. But I think, yeah, creating opportunities for education. And that goes like that's both, like, there are two parts to that. There's like the willingness to be the person who educates, and there's also like being willing to encourage your community to take opportunities for education. Like, one thing that I I need to figure this out, because something I would love to do more of is I've had opportunities before to just like sit down with a group of people. Great thing. Like a couple of years ago at a church I worked at that had a seniors group that met like weekly or bi-weekly to like talk about art and stuff. And one week they were talking about Kent Monkman. And for those of you who don't know, like incredible Indigenous artist who is also Two-Spirit, and I don't like, not within binary gender for sure. And so they were, and so I knew the leader of the group, and they knew that she knew that I was non-binary, and she was like, they have so many questions. Like, would you come in? And I was like, yes, I would love to. And it was honestly beautiful, because they were all like interested in learning, but didn't know where to ask the questions, didn't want to ask questions in a bad way. And like, that's something that I would love churches to actively participate in, creating more opportunities for like people to ask the questions they have, and like know that there are safe spaces to ask those questions. Because I think that's often a barrier to learning for folks, is they like they don't want to accidentally mess up by asking a question. And I want our churches to help us create more opportunities for people to ask their questions in safe ways, because that's what helps create learning. And then that can help spur those actual practical changes. Yeah. More opportunities for dialogue and questions is, yeah, a big one for me.
I think I'd like to piggyback off of that.
Yeah.
And it was going to come up, but to use dried communion as a little bit of a case study here, because we came up with a concept for dried communion, and it took 18 months to go from concept to approval to this is happening, which I found very frustrating at the time. Uh, but in retrospect, I kind of have to back at what Dave Moores did and offer a whole lot of respect, because he approached it from this perspective of, because what I said for dry communion was, if we're going to do a project that is about centering queer people in the church, we can't just push it off to a Thursday night. It needs to be on Sunday morning. It needs to be led by queer people. It needs to center queer people, and the congregation needs to do the work to show up in an appropriate way. And that last part is really what we spent the 18 months on, what Dave emphasized so much. Because, and I bring that up because we knew what we wanted to do. We knew it would be powerful, and it was. Someone flew from Alberta to attend that service who hadn't been to church in 15 years, because they just desperately wanted that sense of being centered and included. Um, but by including that step of, let's talk about this, let's have education sessions, we're working towards a very specific public goal. We're going to do something new as a church, and that might be scary, and we might have questions. Pairing the goal with the education, I think, encouraged a lot of people, more people to engage, even if it was out of fear. Uh, and and now I frame it as this process of, if we want to be doing these pieces, there's absolutely this obligation to learn how to ask those questions and to figure out what is up with pronouns, what's happening with gender. And you know, I mean, what is? I don't know. It's a mystery. That's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these are excellent points. I think some of the most common feedback that we get at Affirm, and I think Ruth noted this in the chat, is that they want to know, right? And one of the most common things that comes to me when I am doing pulpit supply or guest preaching is they come up with they're like, I don't know where else to put this question, so I'm gonna throw it at you. And I'm really grateful in those moments because there are some times where I'm like, okay, don't ever ask anybody this question ever again, but I will sit here with you and talk about it. And it's precisely what you're talking about, that moment for connection, that moment for learning, that moment for growing and moving forward together can really allow for something beautiful to emerge. I think both of you touched on that really well.
I think I just want to kind of sort of say like a back to the basics kind of thing. I think it's on my Instagram profile. I have religion both harms and heals. And like until we can actually say that, and we can say that without with without getting upset by it, like to say it with some element of not clinging to it. Like it both harms and heals, and there's currently ways ongoing in our own communities that religion is both harming and healing. And if we can't say that, then we can't really deal with it. And so I think that's just what I want to add to the conversation, that it's okay to say that. And it's okay to, because it's okay to be looking, there's, the Maya Angelou quote, when you know better, you do better. It's okay to learn from mistakes and not beat ourselves up over what we didn't know, what we did in the past. And yeah, we have to have enough security in ourselves, in the love of Jesus, in the connectedness of our communities, to just have uncomfortable conversations that name things and are still looking for ways to continue and learn and grow. We haven't got it figured out, and we're never going to have it figured out. So
yes, excellent point. We never will have it figured out. And something that I like to remind people is, if you're not looking back at yourself or your life and cringing just a little bit, you haven't grown at all, right? Like if you're looking back and saying, oh my gosh, I would never do that again, that's growth, right? That's moving forward, that's learning new things, that's becoming and changing and ever continuing on. And so actually looking back and going is a really good sign, and something that's quite encouraging, despite sometimes how gross it may feel. Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Thank you. So we're coming to the last of my questions on the list, and then folks in the room, I will turn off the recording and and you can ask away your questions. I'm curious, you three, about what your dreams are for the future, in maybe your work, in this work, in our work. What do you dream of?
I'll jump in because I have an answer. Um, so I've been in the process over the last few years of kind of looking at this whole question of vocation. When I was hired at Shaughnessy Heights, they explicitly labeled the job as minister of instrumental music. I've never been a minister before. How interesting is that? And I didn't take it very seriously at first. Like I'm here to play music and do my job, but through the development of Dry Communion, through what we've been doing with the Sanctuary program, which including Sanctuary D&D, which Jess is now doing in Calgary. I can't believe we're expanding into multiple provinces. Through building the Discord servers, through starting to work with the region on creating digital connections for people who are rural and may not, because as we've seen from the news, there's such a need for connections for queer folks who are stuck in rural BC who might not have that community and those peers locally. Um, now I think what I'm finding is just kind of this realization that the music and the advocacy And the work with the church and all of these pieces, it's like starting. I don't have. I try to have all the words, and I don't have the words, but it just. I think the goal is, on my part, is to kind of look at this emergent organizational collaborative thing that's happening with my vocation and with building community across the region, and to just try to nurture and explore that. I can't necessarily say here's where I want to be or here's where I want these programs to be in 5 years, but just this process of responding to need, one, and two, being supported in that,
Mhm.
which is new for me with the church. It's very strange not to have to kind of claw and fight my way up the cliff for every little tiny inch of progress.
A
Uh,
couple of committees first, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of my very broad, vague answer.
Hmm. Thank you. I love that. And I really love your point about, creating these digital connections and reaching people in rural spaces. As somebody that has only ever lived in, um, Vancouver area and Toronto, I don't have a lot of experience in rural settings. And yet so much of our community is spread among other rural communities. And so finding ways to connect and be connected and share space is really important. Yeah.
I think the word dreams, sometimes when we hear questions about dreams for the future, it's like, that'll never happen. It's too big. It's a dream. But honestly, my dreams are so small and attainable. With a bit of funding and a bit of staffing, we have 3 other post-secondary campuses in Calgary that would like to have a Campus United presence and don't currently. At the U of C specifically, there's, maybe in the hundreds of student clubs. Like, I work out of the Faith and Spirituality Center. I'm an affiliate employee with the university. All of the 17 faith representatives are affiliate employees. So we're vetted by the Faith and Spirituality Center and also sent by our sending faith institution. But the student clubs are like a students' union thing. There are no student clubs. There's tons of Christian student clubs. There are no student clubs currently that would represent a more expansive, progressive theological lens and would be affirming. It doesn't exist. And so the programs and events that we're running with the United Church of the Faith and Spirituality Center are the only ones that are explicitly. There's another chaplain that does run like inclusive programs, but nothing that's like, let's read a Bible story through a queer lens, like explicitly affirming. So there's just so much room. There's so much room for growth. And ultimately the goal would be that, like in my context, that queer students and staff and faculty on campus would feel radically accepted, but not just acceptance and not just finding communities of belonging, but be celebrated and valued for their distinct perspective, wisdom, lived experience, and just how what is brought has the potential and is already making our societies better. So that would be my dream.
I'm going to jump on because Jess, our dreams are very similar. I was having a conversation with a campus chaplain sometime last year, and we were just saying, like, my dream is for there to be an affirming Christian student group at every college and university across the country. Because, like you said, Jess, like, there are multiple Christian faith clubs at every school. And there's so many of those schools where none of them are affirming. And there's just not a place for students who want faith community, but want it to, either encompass their identity or just encompass their values. And I've had the privilege of helping students create those presences where they don't exist, and like seeing that, and also being someone who had the fortune of going to school at a school where there was an affirming faith group, and like knowing how important that was to me. I want one everywhere. That is my dream.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I will just say Ralph Carl's point first. It touches on both of your things. At the University of Toronto, SCM fills that niche of being a queer affirming Christian campus club, chaplaincy, and has at least a 4-decade track record of doing so. Wow, amazing. Gary is saying small community colleges also need the support. Yeah, absolutely.